My name is Mahesh Mudda. I am the chairman for this session. The session is very interesting session because it says tall building and cities, which is need of the day what we have been talking. The kind of population we are talking here, we have no other option but to go high-rise. This conference has been organized, and this conference cannot be the solution for what the subject we are talking about, but I'm sure this will be the good takeaway thoughts for all of us to really think and take the advantage of the experts from the field to take their opinion on this subject, how we can really, because change for the good. Change is the name of the game we talk, and without that we can't succeed. And our chairman, he happens to be one of the first to construct the high-rise buildings. Today we are talking about this subject 30 years back, 40 years back, when because things were not so advanced. That time also because they could do it successfully. Only now we'll have to think and worry about how sustainable buildings we can make, how best infrastructure we can create while going vertically. So we have Mr. Sudhir Jambhekar, who is an architect from New York. He's going to talk on beyond tall buildings. Very interesting subject, and he's an authority.
I'm Sudhir Jambhekar. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the introduction. Based in New York. My subject matter today is really to talk about beyond tall buildings, which is mostly about infrastructure work. I'm a firm believer in the city. I'm a firm believer in the tall buildings, firm believer in the idea of a density and public transportation and therefore sustainable environment. I've always believed in the idea of a city because it's a common place to do many common things. And it allows us to do wonderful things within the city, but it can only function well if it is really supported by a great infrastructure work, but particularly the public transportation system, which is the key, by the way. I live in the United States, but I've never bought a car in my life. I've lived there for 40 years, and I still use public transportation in New York. So, and I'm a good example of it in a sense that I do manage without the car. Having said that, I practice in New York with 4 partners because I'm expected to introduce myself. Our notions are simple in terms of the working process. It's about experimentation in work in the hope of contribution. We have a very diverse practice. We work all over the world, from Shanghai to New York to, of course, Middle East and Japan and all over. My colleague, Jamie, also does this very diverse practice. Our work is based on essentially a process of exploration and finding the right solutions specific to specific sites. And we are deeply rooted into the sustainable issues, as many of you may know or may not know, but one of the first tall building in New York, Condé Nast sustainable building, before the LEED certification process started, was done by us. And we are very much deeply rooted into it. And we are deeply rooted into understanding the local climatic conditions as well. With that as the background information, although I'm going to talk about infrastructure, like most architects, by the way, we design a lot of tall buildings. This was designed by my 2 partners with Renzo Piano out of Genoa. But I have designed many tall buildings myself. This is a project in Riyadh, a tall building. I won't go deep into every project in terms of explanation. But the fundamental idea, even when you're designing a tall building, in my opinion, is to think in terms of the bigger linked thinking process. And by that, what I mean is simply to quote one of the great architects of the last century. He said that when you think about a chair, you think about a room, and when you think about a room, you think about the house, and when you think about the house, you think about a community, and ultimately the city, and in reverse. And that thinking process is essential while you're designing a building. We are designing, currently we are also working on a project in Addis Ababa, a mixed-use project, project in Osaka, only a block away from the city hall. Incredible site, incredible surrounding area, and we really try to link this project into their current infrastructure system, doing multiple things. Brings me to Riyadh. Actually, I'm flying from here to Riyadh to meet with a client. We're doing about 10 buildings for this client. This one is a mixed-use building with a residential on the top. This was an opportunity we were given in Mumbai to do a tall building, and finally in Shanghai. In Tianjin, I was given an opportunity to design a 100-story building, and in Dubai, another 100-story residential building, by the way, all residential building. And then finally, an opportunity to create a city or a small part of the city for about 100,000 population. And the key thing about all of this is, by the way, our work is based on simply a notion that the cities, the sustainability, tall buildings, infrastructure equals density. There are many speakers who spoke this morning in terms of how that density should be managed, controlled, and so on and so forth. But the key thing is about conservation of land, conservation of resources. So the issue is always about sprawl versus density, and of course supported by the public transportation system. New York City has a great public transportation system, so city functions. London has another equally great public transportation system, so it works. Hong Kong has a relatively good public transportation system, and so does Shanghai, you know. But that brings me to two cities that I want to compare just a little bit for a moment. Mumbai, because of the British rule here, had already a setup for infrastructure. As Anthony Wood said earlier, somehow Mumbai failed to make a decision 40 years ago to invest in infrastructure, but it has all the basic fundamentals in place. And of course, the issue is of course the issue of capacity is here as well, as was stated. With those things being said, India's population almost demands a density and public transportation system. This is a great photograph of Mumbai, by the way, at Chowpatty. And very recently in Delhi, there was an article in Financial Express which compared where the rest of the world is in tall buildings versus India. Slightly misinformed article. They missed a lot of buildings in Mumbai, but nevertheless, they were trying to make a comparison between where the rest of the world is in terms of FSI, tallness, density issues, and so on and so forth. That brings me to the issue of how this city has peaked its capacity a long time ago, and brings me to the 4 projects, because I just mentioned about Dubai a little bit. Dubai, relatively new city, doesn't have really a background in terms of infrastructure yet. They've started to do something about it in a significant way. And I'm going to show you 4 projects very quickly, infrastructure projects in Dubai. We were given an opportunity to design a bridge, actually called a 6th crossing bridge on the creek. I don't have a pointer either, by the way. But what we did was, while we were designing the bridge, we first questioned the alignment issues. We then created a bridge, which is a double-arched bridge with cable stays, which looks like this. But while designing a bridge, we also did multiple things. We thought the bridge has an obligation to do more than just carrying cars. Thus, we included the pedestrian walkways underneath the bridge, so people are always in the shadow, as shown in this section. We also were inspired by the issue, the local cultural aspect, which is I'm always intrigued by the Arabic calligraphy, by the way, which has such a great fluidity that I thought the form could take such clues from that, and thus this form as well. And the lighting was based on the moon calendar. As we all know, Islamic calendar is based on the moon. And then, of course, besides doing the bridge, we created this situation where an island is created with many multiple amenities, including a train station, amphitheater, the ferry terminal, and therefore it became just more than a bridge. It's added tremendous amount of amenities and further supported the reserve for the birds. Surprisingly, by the way, Dubai has flamingos, and ospreys, which is an amazing surprise for us. Takes me to another project which is called Opera House Station, a new line which is being designed. We are currently working on this project, and it's a train station near the 6th Crossing Bridge. They asked us to design a simple station. We said, no, it cannot be a simple station. It needs to connect into the city. It needs to facilitate. So finally, we convinced them to take far larger land, connect to the city, from ferry terminal to the one side, to creating a station, and convince them not to have lots of parking either, which is unusual in Dubai. So there's no parking here, by the way. It's all connects. It's an intermodal facility. And the result is basically a simple structure which is raised on a viaduct, totally dependent on a daylighting conditions during, all the time during the day. And we came up with another idea here, which is not that unusual, but nevertheless, air-conditioned spaces where people are. Where the trains are is basically non-air-conditioned space, and we depended on an idea of essentially the train doing the rest of the trick, getting the heat out of the station. And that's what these diagrams show. And during the daytime, we are hoping that we would not need any artificial light, as we're trying to use a material which would, create this daylight condition all the time. Foil take it is called. And the lighting was designed in such a manner that when the train is in the station, you would know it. And when the train is not in the station, you wouldn't know it either, you would know it as well, sorry. And the final image. That brings me to another project which we're currently working on called it's a pedestrian bridge. There are a lot of pedestrian bridges being designed here, which I've seen recently. Rather unfortunate structures, I would say. But having said that, we were given the opportunity to design a skywalk, and we created this idea of connecting the two buildings, but more than that, we really carefully studied the sun and orientation and used the scripted program to create the shading element in absolute appropriate locations and places without compromising aesthetics. And these are some of the drawings and of images as they stand right now, and the lighting as well. Lighting is always very important, by the way, how you do it without creating a light pollution also. Because Dubai is sometimes blinding, in many ways. And that brings me to the bridge called the 5th Crossing Bridge. We were inspired. This is a bridge which is much closer to the sea, where the creek begins to come into the Dubai area. Here the challenge was there are basically two consulates being planned right across, so they didn't want any tall structures. And our point of inspiration was their national bird, which is the falcon, and thus the wings of the falcon. I thought it was wonderful to have a U.S. embassy, which is eagle, represented by eagle, and a British embassy, which is represented by the lion, and that this would be represented by a falcon, the three wonderful species that could come together in some ways. These are the drawings of that bridge, by the way. Even at the ground level, we created landscape elements which would provide incredible connection into the city, pedestrian walkways, and some final images of the bridge. I hope I'm doing okay on time, I'm trying to do it as fast as possible. And the final image of the bridge, by the way. I believe there's a small animation, and then it will conclude on two thoughts. By the way, in this world of globalization, this animation was done, believe it or not, in Argentina. We are based in New York. The project is in Dubai. The delineators are based in France, and animators are based in Argentina for this project. And it's incredible how easy it is to do all of this without a glitch, which is very interesting. Anyway, my final 2 points I want to make is very simply that I'm always inspired by these two thoughts. At the end of the day, by the way, we can rationalize, we can argue, we can do many things, but two things do matter. One of them is basically, the first quote essentially says that designers should be involved in designing all components of the built environment, therefore making a change and improvement. And it's wonderfully said, it's not about the world of design, but it's about design of the world. So even billboard in a city is important. So is transportation, so is elements of transportation, so every aspect needs to be thought through. And the second one is equally an important one, which is John Hockenberry. I really like this one. It essentially asks us to distinguish and separate between the meaning and the noise. And the noise here, he means, I believe, the visual noise. Because we can all make that error of creating statements after statements, which could equally cause problems in the city as well. And with that, I'm done. Thank you so much.